Welcome back to Insights, and today we're going to continue with globalism because this topic is central both to our culture and to the Bible. Now, first, in culture, we keep seeing this come up more and more in terms of do we stick with sovereign nations, which some people call nationalism, or do we minimize the individual governments and constitutions of countries, and do we move towards globalism and being a global community, a global economy, eventually a global government, a global religious system? All of these types of things are debated right now. But the second reason we've got to talk about globalism is what I talked about a week ago in our last Insights video. And that is that the Bible addresses this very topic, and most Christians have no idea that it's there. And again, you can go back and listen to that video, but I just want to touch on a couple quick things just to get us all up to speed here again, dialed in on this topic. One would be Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, right after the flood, where it actually says that God separated the peoples into these nations. That was God's purpose, because he knew if all the people on the earth came together, that the collective mindset and evil that would come from that would be exponential. So God clearly is telling us that his purpose is for individual nations. And then we go right into the very next chapter in Genesis, and we have the Tower of Babel. Mankind is rebelling against God's purposes. So there's that. Acts 17:26, Paul says that God put nations in their places for his purposes, his redemptive purposes, and he gave them boundaries and he gave them the times in which they would exist. So God's purposes are very specific related to nations, and for us to erase borders or even minimize the Constitution or whatever, these are all things that are against God's purposes. Okay, so for today, I just want to back up and take a look at really the growing vibe within culture of globalism. Now, we could go a lot further back. We could talk about how the League of Nations was introduced after World War I, the United Nations after World War II. We could talk about what are organizations that are alleged to be working behind the scenes to bring about globalism, things like the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations, these kinds of things. But I don't want to drill down in our few moments we have together on all of that. What I want to do today is just talk about some very recent things. You might remember from the video last week that I talked about how my wife and I were walking across the University of Montana campus, and there were all these banners that were showing that the university was growing and building for a global century, saying, don't just think about this nation, think globally, and globalization was even there in that banner on campus back in 2012. But we keep running into it in different ways. So one of the more recent examples would be simply the 2016 presidential election. That night, I was watching the returns come in, and as President Trump was pulling ahead, the commentators, the political pundits said, well, this is a backlash against globalism. And that really caught my attention because up till then, I thought that most of the media was denying that there was this push towards globalism, that everybody else should just settle down and this isn't really happening. Here they are talking about it openly, that this vision and mindset towards globalism is now being thwarted. And just a few months before that was Brexit. And Brexit is the British exit from the European Union. Now, that's supposed to be finalized here in the next few months. But that was also a backlash against globalism. In that case, the European Union, which is a step towards globalism. So we see this continually coming up. And to me, there's more and more of a momentum as the decades go by in this direction. I mean, even looking at presidents on both sides of the aisle, I think of how H.W. Bush, Bush 41, how he was called the New World Order president because he always gave these speeches about this New World Order, new international alliances, all this, a different phrase, but the same idea as globalism, where we minimize or even get rid of individual nations. Again, absolutely contradictory to what the Bible teaches and what God's purposes are. But not only here we have a Republican president that was moving in this direction, but I looked at many of the decisions that were made under the Obama administration, and I thought they just really don't make sense unless there's some sort of globalist vision here as well. I think we're set up for next week's Insights video, and that is we have to look at this. If we're moving towards globalism, and most Christians would say in the end times, the Antichrist will be the one that presides over that system, well, if this has already been prophesied and this is going to happen, then what do you and I do now? Can we do anything? Does it matter? And I think that is a loaded question. I think it's an important question. In other words, what are the implications for us today in terms of growing globalism? So I look forward to seeing you next week on Insights.